This is the weekend edition of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, our weekend show is, of course, all about the two of us each nominating what we think is the biggest story of the week, the most remarkable story, the sleeper story, and our favourite story. It is a very competitive podcast. We are essentially trying to find a winner. And so we need someone to do that for us, to help us along. And the best person for the job is clearly our Fear and Greed colleague, Adam Lang. Adam, good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
Do you think Adam is actually the best person for the job, Michael?
Well, he's kind of the only person for the job, isn't he? And
I'm regularly questioned as to whether I'm the best person for the job.
Adam, you know what, though? The thing that I love most is that you bring a certain X factor to the judging.
That's
and
right.
that is the unpredictability of the criteria by which you will be judging us. And that we know, hey, we're looking for the biggest story, but it is the biggest story according to Adam and according to what you kind of feel is the biggest story at this very minute.
Yes.
What I must tell you a little tale. You know, you tell your kids when they're playing sport to never blame the referee. Anyway, my son, who's 20, listened to one of the weekend editions in the last couple of weeks, and he just made the offhanded comment about, you sort of blame the referee all the time, Dad. I hadn't really thought of it in those sort of terms, but he has a point.
Well, it's a unique sport, this podcast, isn't it?
It sure is. Anyway.
Shall we jump into it?
Let's
go with the biggest story. And Sean, you can go first.
Well, see, this is almost, I mean, there's only one big story for the week, Michael. This is very generous of you.
Well, I know. I have a hunch. I mean, you're an economist and you kind of live and breathe this kind of stuff. So I have a feeling I know which way you're going to go with this. So you go for it. You'll do a better job of it than I would.
That's very generous. The Reserve Bank, of course, lifted the official cash rate this week by 50 basis points, pretty much surprising everyone. We knew rates were going to go up, but we thought they were probably most likely going to go up by 25 basis points, perhaps 40 basis points. It went 50 basis points. Share market ended lower as a result. The Australian dollar went up above 72 US cents. Bond yields jumped to 3-year highs. Now, what it means, if you have a $500,000 mortgage over 25 years, you'll be paying about $200 extra a month as a result of the rate hike this week and the one last month. In total, it's up 0.75%. We're looking at standard variable home loan rates more in the high threes, maybe around 4 at the moment as a result of these increases. It was a huge jump. Now, the Reserve Bank had hinted it was going to go in 25 basis point increments. The shock of the 50 basis point increment is really what was most remarkable this time round. As I mentioned, it affected financial markets. I think it affected people's psyche. You know, consumer confidence will fall as a result of this. You add in cost of living pressures, particularly energy. We talked about lettuce, the cost of a lettuce this week going to $12, those sorts of things, plus this interest rate hike. Massive week for the economy. Now, Jim Chalmers, the new federal treasurer, is talking down the economy. Now, the Reserve Bank was actually more confident about it. And I suppose that is the silver lining here. The reason we are doing this, I mean, apart from the fact we have ultra low interest rates because of COVID, is because we can afford to, because people have jobs, because the economy is doing okay. Easily the biggest story of the week and probably the month, Michael.
Oh, wow. Yes. Look, I'm basically forced to try a different approach here. I'm going to be a little bit creative because obviously I agree with you. That was the biggest story domestically. So what I'm doing is actually looking elsewhere in the world, and the biggest story for its global impact would have to be China's economy starting to come back to life. So obviously we've had Shanghai and other kind of key cities have been in lockdown as part of their COVID zero policy, and as the world's biggest manufacturer of goods, that's had massive flow-on effects. But with those cities now emerging from lockdown, exports jumped 17% in May, and that's really one of the first signs that the world's second largest economy is kicking back into gear. And that is obviously great news for the rest of us. Great news for choked up supply chains. Great news for a country like Australia that supplies raw materials to Chinese factories. So, yes, your story was big. My story affects the whole world.
Oh, I like it. Good sell.
Adam, what do you reckon?
Both very good stories. And Michael, I have to say, a very honourable attempt. But Sean is the clear winner this week. You know, when it comes to affecting nearly 26 million Australians, a 0.5 lift in the interest rate will have greater business impact, I think, than the China economy signals that it's starting to come back to life.
Yeah, I mean, 26 million people compared to 7 billion. Oh, that's I mean...
Always takes it well, doesn't he?
He does, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He really is a poor loser.
No, I just wanted to point out the flaws in your judgment. And
I love that. It's not the poor loser, it's a poor judge.
That's it. Righto, let's move on, Michael. You can go first this time. What's your most remarkable story for the week?
All right, well, look, Adam, I hope we can just kind of put all that behind us and just pretend I didn't say anything. Let's start fresh. I know that you can do that. So my most remarkable story this week is all about politics. And really, it's this question of who thought that Anthony Albanese would make such a good international statesman? He had such a shaky, it was kind of a slightly bumbling election campaign. Remember all the kind of the blunders that he had, the forgetting the official cash rate, forgetting the unemployment rate. All of a sudden, he's now flicked the switch to jet-setting Prime Minister, and the pace is just remarkable. He spent the first part of this week in Indonesia, where he pushed for much deeper ties with our most populous neighbour. He also rode a bamboo bike with his pants tucked into his socks, which I thought was a very nice moment.
What a remarkable moment, really.
It really was, wasn't it? It was a great photo.
I'm with you.
Then later in the week, he hosted New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in Sydney. She's the first foreign leader to visit since the election. Add to that, since the election, we've had the lightning visit to the Quad with the leaders of the US, India, Japan. Then Foreign Minister Penny Wong was in Fiji, Tonga and Samoa, countering the presence of her Chinese counterpart, obviously, in the region as well. Defence Minister Richard Marles has been in Singapore for a security conference. There's talk the Prime Minister might soon visit Papua New Guinea. It's only been 3 weeks since the election. That is a cracking pace. And for me, it shows a pretty remarkable focus on foreign relations.
So, my question, Michael, is it remarkable that Anthony Albanese makes such a good international statesman, or is it remarkable that the focus is so much on foreign relations?
I think it's all remarkable. I think the fact that he's had such an extreme focus on our international relations, but that he's actually done a good job of it. That generally there hasn't been much criticism of any of these appearances, and the relationships that he forms seems to be pretty kind of decent and doing some good work in building Australia's reputation internationally. So I say overall, remarkable.
Fair enough. I'll tell you my remarkable story, which is a little closer to home, to be honest. Used car prices. They've jumped 18% over the past year as demand rises because of the backlog in the new car market. Remember the old adage, you lost 20% or 25% or something of the value of your car as you drove it out of the car yard? Wow, hasn't things changed? Now, the size of the increases have started to level out, but since the start of the pandemic in early 2020, used car prices are up 79%. Who would have thought a used car could have been an investment? But that 79%, it's better than the share market. It's better than the housing market too. It's quite remarkable. If you include trucks, it's actually up 81%. Now, the initial jump in prices occurred because people were avoiding public transport, and they also took a lot of road trips around their own states because they couldn't travel anywhere. More recently, the rise has occurred because people just can't get their hands on new cars because of the supply chain issues there. The fact that used car prices are up that much is remarkable, and I don't think that's ever happened in the history of the automobile in Australia. Wow, good line, Sean. Do you like that one?
Can I just clarify, though, that we are not an investment podcast and that we are not telling people to take their super and use it to buy an old Camry in the hope that the value is going to rise. You should definitely speak to a professional advisor before you invest in a used car.
That's right. And if they say invest in a used car, get a new financial advisor.
That's right. Great advice there, Sean.
Adam.
I think Michael, clear winner. I think it's terrific, actually. And I think I'm, like many people, impressed with the start the new government has made.
I think you guys are underselling Albo. You're here saying, this guy's an idiot. He was a bumbling fool during the election campaign, and now look at him. What a statesman. Oh, you have little faith.
He was bumbling a bit during the election campaign.
And didn't make that up. Yeah,
and his media appearances were limited, and he did not do particularly well in press conferences and that kind of thing. And suddenly, he's just He's just transformed into a statesman. I think it's great, considering he is our Prime Minister representing us.
I think it's great. I don't think it's remarkable, though. He wasn't that much of a fool before the election.
Okay, well, take out the fool part. Even just independently, his performance over the last few weeks has been remarkable.
Michael, you won.
Well, I haven't convinced Sean.
Let it go.
So that's the problem. I have not yet convinced Sean. So we'll continue this discussion later.
Can I just want to add one element to that, which is it's very much been a team approach, not just about the Prime Minister, which I think is a marked difference. Sean, your story is remarkable, but just gets pipped this week. I think it's stunning what's happening with used cars. And to be honest, I don't know when their prices are going to soften.
All right, so 1-1 now. Heading into halftime, we'll be back in a moment with the sleeper story of the week. All right, Sean, we are looking now for our sleeper story. So this is a story that's maybe not getting the attention that it deserves, or it might become a bigger story down the track. I reckon this is always our most contentious discussion, this one, because generally you criticize any story that I choose as a sleeper and you say, that's not a sleeper. Everyone's been talking about it. I get very nervous ahead of this category. So you go first.
Okay. Well, Apple going into financial services, launching a buy now, pay later product, Apple Pay Later, is the sleeper story. Not because it's doing it, right? There was a lot of media about the fact that it's doing it. Why it's a sleeper is that Apple itself is moving into financial services. Traditionally, Apple has used Goldman Sachs, the big US bank, as its bank. So if it wanted financial products, it might lean on Goldman Sachs to provide the product, kind of white labeling. Obviously, Apple Pay, those sorts of things, the technology has been developed by Apple. But if I use Apple Pay, the money still comes out of my local bank account. Apple is now taking the next step. It's making the loans, the buy now, pay later loans itself. It's becoming a financial services firm. It's quite incredible. Now, it's done it in music. It revolutionized music. It's done it in content and movies. Obviously, it's done it in technology. It's the biggest technology company in the world. Now, it's actually pushing into being a financial services provider, not just the technology that sits over the top, actual financial services. And it's big. It's got such deep pockets. It's got 1.8 billion active users, or the 1.8 billion active iPhone users. It could take over the world. I mean, I don't know, that is overstating it. But as a sleeper story, the fact that they're pushing into financial services, quite incredible.
I love how you mentioned the impact that Apple has had on the music industry, revolutionizing it. Knowing that Adam is a music fan, a music nut, that is very cleverly done, playing the man here. Look, my sleeper story this week, it could probably also fit into the favourite story category because I think it's a cracker anyway. But New Zealand has released a plan, it was just a draft plan, to put a price on agricultural emissions. The goal is essentially to tackle one of the country's biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions, which is the methane coming out of 26 million sheep and 10 million cattle.
This is your favourite story, not your sleeper story.
this is both. You know what? I'll just kind of copy and paste it and I'll do it twice. Apparently, nearly half of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture, but those emissions have so far been exempt from the carbon trading scheme there. So, Sean, I know you're wondering, and this is why I get so nervous, is why is it a sleeper story? Because Australian livestock have a gas problem too.
They do not. Our cow.
They've got very good digestive systems, our cows. No, because agriculture contributes about 13% of Australia's own greenhouse gas emissions each year, and of that, about half is methane. So, could we see something similar happening here in Australia? Maybe, just maybe, that's what Jacinda Ardern and Anthony Albanese were discussing over dinner on Thursday night.
Flatulent cows.
That's right. While they were eating a steak, you're like, how much methane do you reckon this cow produced as they're eating a nice porterhouse? What do you reckon?
Oh, save us, Adam. Save us, Adam.
Save us indeed. It might surprise both of you to learn that Sean's the winner on this one.
Really?
I thought you were going to have a third option then. It might surprise both of you, think you both lose.
No, I think the Apple Pay Later is, as you say, Sean, for all those reasons, massive. One of the biggest companies in the world entering into a new space of financial services. Incredible. also incredible, but not nearly on the same scale yet. But it is important. So I really do like Michael's story as well. But Sean, you win this one.
But this wasn't the biggest story. This is the sleeper story. Again, Adam Lang's mystery criteria come into play.
Well, okay, on the scale of sleeping, this one sleeps harder.
Heavier, I think, is probably the better word.
Okay.
I'm a hard sleeper. Okay, got it.
Okay, let's move on to the favourite story. Now, we do know you like the flatulent cows as a favourite story, but it's your second favourite story. What's your first?
I'm dumping the flatulent cows because clearly it's not Adam's favourite. My favourite this week, aside from the cows, is Boris Johnson. And because, look, we've been talking about it for weeks. The thing is, I don't think we've seen the end of it just yet. The UK Prime Minister has certainly been under the pump lately. He was caught out, obviously, attending and hosting parties at 10 Downing Street. This was all during COVID lockdowns. The rest of the UK was isolating. That's pretty bad. Infringements were issued. Boris was criticised in a report and he said, I've been humbled. Everyone should just move on. Well, his colleagues don't want him to move on. They don't want to move on either. In fact, 40% of them want him gone. He won a no confidence vote in Parliament, but he's only got 3/5 of Conservative MPs backing him. They can't have another no confidence vote for a year. So Boris says, once again, it's time to move on. I just love how thick-skinned he is. I really don't think this is the end of it. Obviously not with so many of his own MPs and a large chunk of the public still pretty angry about it. So it's just going to be a very, very interesting time ahead. How on earth do you govern knowing that nearly half of your own party hates you?
Yes, good question. And all of the other side of politics hates you.
That's right. That's a lot of enemies. I know politicians have enemies, but that is a lot.
Look, my favourite story this week was the one about the humble puffer jacket turning 100 years old. It was invented by an Australian, a guy from Orange in the central west of New South Wales, a guy called George Finch. He was on one of Mallory's expeditions to the top of Everest. He made it to within 500 metres wearing the first ever puffer jacket. He called it an eider-down jacket. It was bright green, apparently, made from the skin of a hot air balloon and stuffed with eider-down. All his colleagues, Mallory and friends, were all wearing tweeds, as you would when you're a British climber. He looked a bit silly in his bright green eider-down, but he wore it anyway and apparently had the last laugh because he was the warmest of the lot. Now, none of that particular expedition made it to the top of Everest, but he did invent the eider-down. He grew up in Orange till about 14 or 15. He then moved to Europe, George Finch, had a son who was Peter Finch, the actor. I just think that's a cracking story. Happy birthday, puffer jacket.
Yeah, well done. Adam, what do you reckon?
Oh, Michael, you win on this one. It's a bit of a twist for me because the puffer jacket is such a positive story and the Johnson story is such a negative one. But I think as it goes to high farce, Boris Johnson has hit new levels. And like you, Michael, I don't think it's going to end here. So you win that one. It's 2-2 this week, gentlemen.
Sean, I think you almost should have won the puffer jacket one because, Adam, if you looked in a mirror at the moment, you would see that you are in fact wearing a puffer jacket
yeah.
during this recording. So
I was trying to work towards Adam, but anyway. That's all right.
Anyway.
What I have learned today, though, Michael, is Adam likes a little bit of politics. He went the elbow one, he went the Boris Johnson one. A little bit of politics next week might be the way to go.
Yeah,
get him on side.
All politics. Suddenly we end up with 8 politics stories. All right, 2-2. I think that's pretty honourable. Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you, Michael.
And thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great weekend.